Hello, and welcome to What That Means Is. This is episode 7, and I'm Rosalie Drysdale, and this is Ken Drysdale, the author and originator of this investigative report.
Yes, and if you don't know what we're talking about the investigative report. Maybe this is your first episode of What That Means Is, but this is the 7th of installment right now, and we're talking about the investigation into criminal allegations concerning COVID-19 pandemic response. Now, you can get a copy of this for your very self for free, anonymously. Don't have to sign up to anything. You just have to visit our website. Then you can push one of those buttons, and it'll just download on your computer. No one has to know anything about you. It's anonymous and it's free, as I said before. But if you want to keep up with everything we're doing, you can subscribe there. And again, it's for free as well. And you'll get blog posts from us on a fairly regular basis. But you won't get anybody trying to sell you anything. We won't be charging for subscriptions later on. It's just for your information. The website can be thought of as a toolbox.
And I want to explain again why we call the show What That Means is because the whole idea is to take apart and break down the items and to basically the whole report. So we look at a page, we look at a chapter, we look at a chart, and Ken will describe it, or one of us will just say, and we'll just describe and say what that means is, and that's why that's been the genesis of why we call this webcast What That Means Is.
Yeah, and part of this is because when people use the S word, sometimes it turns other people off. And what do I mean by the S word? I mean statistics. When you say statistics, most people's eyes roll back and they don't want to listen anymore, and they're intimidated. But that's not what this is about. These are statistics, and they are numbers from Statistics Canada, but there's nothing more complex in here than addition and subtraction and some division, and we will describe it to you in the most easy to understand terms so that you will be confident in what you've heard, and you can do your own research to confirm what we were telling you.
So Ken, do you want to just kind of do a little bit of a recap of what we did in the other episodes, the previous ones?
Yeah, and some of the previous episodes, we have been talking to you about the numbers. And specifically what we were doing was we were comparing mortality numbers between 2019 prior to the pandemic and for 2020 during the first year of the pandemic. Now I want to point out there's some special things about 2020. The COVID-19 would not have been expected to be properly understood because it was new.
Yep.
They said it was new. There were no treatments. Anyone who was at risk to it, who had serious risk to it, would have succumbed to it in that first year. And there were no vaccines available, so there's no complicating factors about someone claiming that the vaccine caused a death or not, because there weren't any vaccines. So that's one of the reasons that we looked at 2019 prior to pandemic and 2020.
Yes.
But there's also a really big reason that we didn't look at the data in 2021. Rose, do you know what that reason was? And I'm saying this in November of 2022. Well, Statistics Canada hasn't released any of those numbers for 2021.
Oh yeah, right.
So
I'm getting mixed up because we're in 2022. Right, they still haven't.
We can't even tell you what the final numbers were in 2021. Now, it's kind of hard to believe that this would have been numbers that the population in Canada would have really wanted to get their hands on, but Statistics Canada hasn't released it yet. What do you think about that, Rose?
Well, I just can't even, I can't believe it. I can't believe it because, I don't know, this has been reproduced over 300,000 times, and who knows how many more times people have shared it. So the word is getting out that we're studying Stats Canada's numbers, and we're kind of putting, holding their foot to the fire, so to speak. And I think they're just kind of not so sure that they want to just release those numbers as easily as all that, because they're a little nervous. Because we have taken these numbers of 2020, 1920.
2020.
Oh my goodness, 2020. And Ken has taken apart those numbers and he has put together this very concise report. That's why I think they're not letting those numbers out the cat out of the bag yet.
Well, the other thing that we want to point out, and we've been trying to point it out on just about every show, is that these numbers that we're presenting here, these are not opinion numbers. These are not, we've taken off this number and we've added to that number because of this or that or the other thing. No, these are the raw numbers from Statistics Canada. This is how they reported it. So if they said 2 people died of COVID, we said 2 people died of COVID. If they say there was a population of 38 million, we say there was a population of 38 million. We haven't manipulated their numbers. And with that, I'll give a little recap
Yes.
on what we're going to talk about today.
Please do.
You know, it's important when you make a decision and you weigh the risks or the benefits between two options that you know what those risks and benefits are. And to put it in simple terms, if I was in a burning building on the third floor, and if I stayed in that building, there was a 100% chance I was going to die. But there was a 50% chance that if I threw a chair through a window and jumped out 3 stories, that I would live. 50% chance I would live if I jumped out the window. 100% chance I would die if I stayed in the building. Which one do you think I'm going to take? Of course I'm going to jump out the window. I have a chance of life.
Yeah.
That's kind of illustrative on why you need certain information so you could make decisions. For instance, you need to understand, and we're going to talk today specifically about children between the ages of 5 and 14, or sorry, 0 to 14 years of age. And we're going to talk about what their risk was, according to Statistics Canada, of dying, what their mortality chances were, and we're going to compare it to what Health Canada knew were the risks associated with the vaccine that they were mandating these children to take.
And we know that they knew those risks because they gave us the numbers.
Yes. And we talked about some of this in different age groups already on previous episodes. So if you want to have a recap on those, feel free to take a look. Now, starting on page 37 in the report, you're going to see this big, intimidating table. And I'm going to start.
You're going to go there
I'm
first?
just going to talk
Okay.
about that first.
Yep.
And what that is along the left vertical column, there's a whole bunch of different categories, mortality causes for the people. And this, by the way, is a chart that talks about 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic was announced. And then each column after that is an age group. So if we go to the first column, right at the very top, it says 0 to 14. That's for children between the ages of 0 to 14. The line underneath that tells you there's 6 million children in that age group, and that's extremely important to know. And we'll talk about why. And then it'll tell you the total number of deaths under that line, and it says 616. So in 2020, if you were in Canada between the ages of 0 and 14 years old, 616 children died from whatever cause, from all causes. And so you could actually go down the list and you could pick out different things. You can see in COVID-19, the government reported 1 death. So there were 6 million children in that age group. They reported 1 death. So that means your odds of catching COVID and dying of it, if you were 0 to 14 years of age, was 1 in 6 million. Now look at this. Sepsis. There were 5 children died of sepsis. 1 they reported died of COVID. 112 from cancer, malignant neoplasms. Diabetes, 6 died.
And down the row, 127 of accidents. We're
Yeah.
down, and 50 congenital. 39 suicide.
39, so 13 homicides. And then there's 1 complication from medical right near the bottom. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Somebody dying from complications due to medical procedures was equal to the number of people they reported dying of COVID-19.
Very good point.
Now, another thing before we get really into some of the details here is I want to take your eye down to the second horizontal line from the bottom. And you'll see that's labeled other causes. And you can see, if you go all the way to the side, to the end, to the right, was a total of 64,432 deaths in Canada in 2020, and Statistics Canada didn't tell us what they were. They put all those in a black box and said other causes. Now let's compare.
Big question mark there. I'm sorry to say. Really.
Yeah.
You know, when you look at all, can I just interject here? 64,000 and almost 64,000 and a half other causes. That's among the top 3 causes. Really, we've got malignant neoplasms. That's at 80,965. That's cancers. Diseases, heart disease, 53,686. And then the next number, or the number that is comparable to those, is that very number, other causes. I mean, question mark.
Yeah, you know what? It's kind of like you're going to play poker with me, but I've got a pocket full of cards here. And you're going to say, oh, that's okay. I could pull out a card anytime I want or slide one into my pocket.
I mean,
That's
it
what
just
this
makes
is.
you really have to wonder.
Absolutely.
What that's
Now,
about.
the other thing too is that this chart is based on Statistics Canada information, which reports mortality to the 50, what they call the 50 leading causes of mortality in Canada. Now, somebody who's quick out there at counting is going to tell me, well, Ken, but there's not 50 horizontal lines. There's not 50 causes you listed there. The reason for that is out of all those 50 causes, a whole bunch of them never had any deaths, and they haven't for years. You know, like scarlet fever is listed. Nobody, my father got scarlet fever, by the way, Rose. I don't know if you knew that.
I think you told me that.
1928,
Yeah.
and his vision was messed up by it, but he lived. But in any case, my point is that they list all kinds of things as leading causes of death with 0 deaths in them. Look at right near the bottom, 1, 2, 3, 4 up from the bottom. Guess what? There's a column there that they report war. There was 1 death in the 85-plus-year-old group under war, which they listed.
And I guess you included war because there was actually a fatality there.
There,
That's why
there must have been, and maybe the person was injured in Korea or in World War II. I don't know. But, you know, some
and
interesting...
succumbed to that.
Yeah, some
injury.
interesting things that aren't on there is overdose. Where's overdose deaths?
Oh,
Do you see them on the list anywhere? I don't see them. You know how they keep telling us that they
That's
skyrocketed last year?
Oh, I don't know. Is it would it be a decent guess to say that could be in other causes?
Maybe, but we don't know,
But
do
they
we?
don't want to talk about it.
Okay, so again, this chart I think is important to you just to look through it, just get a feel for it. Obviously, you're not going to memorize the numbers, but you just want to get a feel for orders of magnitude, what was going on in different age groups.
I think it's a very clarifying thing to look
Yeah.
at this. Really, it kind of gives you a new perspective.
Yeah, so before we move on, I want you to keep in your mind that the odds of you getting COVID and dying from it, if you were 0 to 14 years of age, was 1 in a population of over 6 million. So
Right.
your odds were 1 in 6 million.
Did you want to talk about just that analogy of the 6 million, or did you want to say that later?
Well, I can do it here. I was going to talk about it a little bit later, but
fine.
what Rosalie's referring to is, if you're like me, you really have a hard time getting your mind around what is 6 million. 6 million is a big number. Maybe that's what Uncle's got in the bank. But 6 million is a big number, and I have a hard time understanding it. So if you took 6 million children and you started in St. John's, Newfoundland, and you linked them arm in arm like this,
Like so.
and did a line of them. That line would stretch from St. John's, Newfoundland to Tofino on Vancouver Island and stretch back almost to Calgary. Now imagine 1 child in that line died of COVID-19. 1 child. How many more died of, and we're going to get into that. We're going to talk about the risks of other causes,
Yeah.
things that perhaps if we would have put billions of dollars into. And we're going to talk about those risks, and then we're going to talk about what Statistics Canada reported as the adverse effects and the number of adverse effects that came because of the vaccine.
Yep. Right. So, like looking at this chart here for persons 0 to 14 years of age, this is in the middle of page 38. You can easily identify this chart. And again, wow, 1 COVID death and 39. So compared to 39
Yeah.
suicides.
So yeah, so as you know, they reported 1 COVID death for that. So if you say the chances, if you just say that 1 COVID death, 1. So suicides, you had 39. So you had 39 times more chance of dying of suicide in the 0 to 14 age
Right.
group than you did of catching COVID and dying from it. Homicide, 13 times higher chance. How about accidents?
Crazy, 127 times.
127
Wow.
times. And for those of you who like percentages, most of us can't get our minds around that. That would be a 12,700% higher rate of accidents.
Of a chance.
Of a chance,
To
yeah.
die by an accident.
Influenza,
Yeah.
the common flu, 16 times. 16 times more children died of the flu than died of COVID-19. And again, you can
Cancer's
relate
a
that
big killer,
directly
too.
back to the previous chart. Cancer was 112 times higher rate of death.
I mean, this chart really puts things in perspective.
Absolutely.
It sure does. Wow.
So that kind of gives you some of the what was going on in 2020, what some of the odds were, what some of the chances were, and so that's part of the equation that we talked about earlier. You know, the where I was talking about if I was in a burning building, Okay, so now we know part of the equation to that. We know what your chances are of dying.
Can I also just add, knowing this, and the government knew this, Stats Canada gave us those numbers, knowing this, despite this, the government continued to mandate, put pressure, such pressure on parents and children in this age range to be vaccinated.
And now it's actually gone worse. But we'll talk about that in another episode, so stay tuned for
Right,
that.
because they're still pressuring like crazy.
Yeah. So the next thing we want to talk about is kind of the other side of the equation. You know, if you were facing these odds of death due to COVID, so what were the chances? So what could you do? Well, you could take the vax, which was being pushed on folks. So what were the risks associated with the vax? That's what we're going to talk about next. That's the second part of the equation. So these numbers are as of February 11th, 2022, and they're reported by Health Canada. And so the first thing Health Canada did, and if you watched our previous episode, we talked about how they were telling you the story, but they weren't telling you the whole truth. Well, Statistics Canada reported that the number of serious adverse reactions in children age group from 5 to 11, and that's how they reported it, because of course they weren't given the vax at that time to children under the age of 5. They are now. Anyway, what they reported was 263 serious adverse reactions per 100,000 vaccinations. Now, remember I talked about how they were telling the story in such a way that you really couldn't understand it before? This is another example. Why did they report cancer deaths or influenza deaths or anything else for that matter as so many? Like 100. There were 100 of them in Canada. There were 100 car accidents in Canada last year. But here, they tell you there was 263 per 100,000. In my opinion, this was told in such a way that you look at that and you go,
Interesting.
263 per 100,000, that's not bad. Now, keep in mind, when we talked a little bit earlier about how many kids died of COVID, and we talked about there's 6 million kids linked arm in arm, and one of them was reported to have died with COVID. One?
This was specifically done to minimize the number, to
Absolutely.
make it look minimized.
But we can do the arithmetic, and that's all it is arithmetic. According to Health Canada, 2,339,876 doses of the vaccine had been given to children 5 through 11 years of age. So if you do the math on that, keeping in mind that they injected 2,300,000 and change
I can't even believe that number. That's just outrageous.
that means that there were 6,153 reactions in those 2 million kids, 2.3 million
Wow.
kids that they vaccinated.
Wow.
And those are in kids that had
That's unbelievable.
a statistically zero chance of getting and
getting
dying of
COVID.
COVID, 1 in 6 million. Now,
I mean, let that sink in, ladies and gentlemen. Can you repeat that again? Just that last stat. Unbelievable.
sure, I mean, this means that they caused, if you do the arithmetic, they caused 6,153 adverse reactions in the group of 2,339,000 children between the ages of 5 and 11 that they vaccinated. 6,153 reactions. Now, you remember what we talked about a little bit earlier, and I know I'm recapping here, but we were talking about a population of 6 million children and a line of children from St. John's, Newfoundland to Tofino and part of the way back, and that there was one child in that group that they reported to have died by COVID or with COVID. But in this one, we're talking about 2,300,000
you're
kids.
right.
And in that line of just 2 million kids, which is about a third of the overall number of kids, there were 6,153
Yeah.
severe reactions. Now, to put that in the kind of terms we were talking about earlier, if we say that the odds, and once again, we said that the odds of dying from COVID in that age range are 1, then your odds of getting an adverse reaction to the vaccine
Yep.
are almost 16,000 times higher. 16,000 times higher than your chance of contracting and dying of COVID.
So interesting. The way you present the numbers tell a completely different story.
Yes. So now we're talking overall about what. Oh, but there's one very interesting point here that I want to point out, and we're going to do a show a little later on this. But the other big news here is these adverse reactions that they're talking about were reported only under a voluntary system.
Oh,
And most people in Canada
wow.
have never heard of that system. I bet you many of you have heard of the
Theirs.
VAERS system in the United States. And some people have heard of the CARES system in Canada. The CARES system is not the official government reporting system. I challenge you to find out the name of that official Canada reporting
Do
system.
you have the name?
We have the name in the report, and I can go fishing for it because I haven't remembered. But it's a big, long name like this that most people haven't even heard of.
Do medical personnel even know where to report that to?
I don't know. Maybe somebody should ask them. But again, my point is this. Let's say that the offense of speeding is a voluntary thing. In other words, you don't get a ticket unless you go down to the police station and report that you were speeding going to grandma's house that day. How many speeding tickets in Canada do you think would be given out? Rose, would you report yourself?
Never.
What about homicides? You know, homicide, death by COVID, those are pretty serious things. Is reporting of homicide voluntary? I don't think so. But this was. So when we talk about the statistics and we talk about that you have almost a 16,000 time higher chance of an adverse reaction to the vaccine shot, bear in mind that that's voluntary information. That's a bit of a pain to report.
Well, and that's a very important thing that you're just saying, because that's an open-ended number, actually. then.
Absolutely.
I mean, that the total number actually would be open-ended.
Yeah.
This is
And once
unbelievable.
and do you think that doctors are going to be inspired to report that when a mother goes home and the kid's in bed and their nose is bleeding and they phone the doctor? Do you think the doctor gets on the thing and reports it to that system right away?
I don't think a lot of doctors even believe that there are adverse
No,
reactions,
that-
or that if a child is demonstrating something, that they even attach that to the vaccine.
Yeah.
I think a lot of them don't even.
And like I said, you know, folks, next time you're speeding, remember, you really should go to the police and report it. It's voluntary, but, you know, anyway, I wanted to put that point
I
in
think
there.
I'd have to go to the police every day.
So that's part of it. Now, the other part of it that we want to talk a little bit about is, and we're not giving you opinion here. What we're
No.
going to talk about is the vaccine, the manufacturer product monographs, which the government had before they approved these vaccines. So, manufacturer monograph is the informational brochure that the manufacturer of a pharmaceutical usually has in the little bottle of pills that you have, and it's usually a great big thing. You unfold it, and it tells you about all the things. Now, the government had this, and they had it on their website, and we've simply copied it and put it for you, word for word, in the report.
Starting on page 39 at acute allergic reactions.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they talk about anaphylaxis, which is severe reaction to the vaccine, and they talk about monitoring the patient for at least 15 minutes, 30 minutes. They say you shouldn't get a second dose if you've had an allergic reaction to the first one, but we all know stories
Yeah.
where folks had to take the second one because if they didn't, they weren't fully vaccinated, and therefore they would get fired from their job, they wouldn't be allowed to go to school, all kinds of things.
So you're telling me, okay, just a second here. The following outlines the vaccine risk information listed on the Government of Manitoba's
Own
website.
Yep.
Is it safe to assume that every province had that listed on their website?
I have specifically looked at Ontario and Alberta, or British Columbia, I should say, and a lot of the other provinces referred to the federal government reporting site, and it had it on it.
All right, so
They all
it was
had it.
there.
They all had it.
Okay, but so if the government put it on their websites, they would have known this.
Yes. Now, the next one is cardiovascular, myocarditis and pericarditis. So they're talking about that. Of course, they say it's rare cases, but we know what's going on in the news right now. And by the way, they specifically say in here that it occurs more commonly in adolescents and young adults. And yet, we were still giving it to kids. And it was never tested on children.
Right.
It talks on the next page, page 40, it talks about fertility. It says, it is unknown whether Comirnaty, which is the Pfizer biotech commercial name for their vaccine, has an impact on fertility. So they don't know if it's going to have an impact on fertility, and they're giving it to children. They're giving it to children.
Sorry to backtrack here, but driving and operating machinery, it even says it might have some effects mentioned under 8 adverse reactions that temporarily affect your ability to drive.
Yeah, well, we were talking about 0 to 14-year-olds, and most of those
Oh,
don't
I
drive.
see.
Now, you
Of
did
course.
at
Well, I
that
did.
age, but
13 I was driving. But that was in a little cow town.
and then bleeding disorder, hematologic reactions, immune system disorders, and then they talk about and again, so there's all of these unknowns, all of these unknown risks. They never tested it on children. They never tested it on children. I repeat that. They don't know what the long-term effects are. They know there's effects in the heart. They know they don't know if there's effects on fertility. They don't really know any of the effects in toxicology. And we talked about earlier, they did no testing on whether it was cancer-causing, whether it was carcinogenic. And there's been no long-term effect testing on any of this. So
It does beg the question, why? Why would you do that? Why would you put this into little children and then insist that they have it in order to do certain activities, to play in competitive sports,
to go to school.
to go to school, to go to summer camp for some of these corporations? Why would you insist when there's been no testing? Why would you do that? I mean, I'm not asking you to answer the question right now. I just think it's a very good question for us to ask ourselves.
And you know, there's more and more coming out all the time. Just recently in the European Union Parliament, senior director of the Pfizer Corporation was asked the question, does this stop transmission? Remember, they kept telling you, take it because you want to protect grandma or your neighbor? And they said they did no testing. So that was a lie. They talk about the effectiveness of the vaccine, and we're going to do a whole show on that because that was a lie. They used what they call relative efficiency or efficacy of rather than absolute efficacy. And I know you don't know what that is, but we will explain it to you in another show.
Maybe you do know, but we'll still explain it.
You know, so now you have all the parts of the equation. You knew what the chances are or the risks were of you in this age group catching COVID and dying from it, 1 in 6 million. You knew that the chances of you having a serious adverse reaction were almost 16,000 times higher than that. And you knew that there was no testing on kids, no long-term testing, no carcinogenic testing, no toxicity testing, no fertility testing, nothing. And you now know that any of the reporting of adverse reactions was to a somewhat unknown voluntary reporting system. How does your stomach feel right now?
Yeah.
And this is just the facts.
Yeah.
So, Rose, I think that's enough for today.
Well, I would like to say, before we go, I want to encourage you, and I'd like to do this frequently. Don't be afraid of looking at the facts. Don't be afraid of looking at some of these statistics. Don't be afraid of anything. Don't be afraid of any of this. You are powerful. You are strong. You are intelligent. You stand up to your full stature in every way, shape, and form. Emotionally, mentally, physically, and look it straight in the eye. We're walking hand in hand, we're walking side by side with you. And we appreciate your involvement as well. Honestly, we love you and we believe in you. And we don't want you to be afraid. So, once again, we thank you for joining us today. And you want to also say that.
Yes, and I want to say, keep your emails and comments coming into us. The contact email address is on the screen. We've improved the show already, and just a matter of a few episodes because of some of the things that our viewers have told us about. You may or may not have noticed, and we talked about it before, how we've changed our venue a little bit. We're now in a sound studio, and that was directly due to folks with hearing impaired conditions who are asking us to improve the audio portion of our report.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
So please keep them coming. Remember, if you haven't got a copy of this report, it's free. You can download it anonymously. It's from our website, which is on the screen, thetruefactsc19.com. It's right on the front page. There's a picture of the cover of the report, and there's a whole bunch of push buttons alongside it. You can just push that button, and it will download automatically and anonymously into your computer. Also, it doesn't cost anything. If you want to keep up with the latest news and on these shows, you can subscribe to our newsletter. There's a little push button on the top of the website that says news. You push on that, you can subscribe, and in your inbox, whenever a news post comes out, whenever a new show comes out, it'll pop up. And by the way, I wanted to mention, Rose, did you know that when they go to look at our shows, you can look at it in 3 different platforms of your choice. You can look at it on YouTube,
yeah.
Rumble, or BitChute.
Okay.
And so
Good to know.
if YouTube decides that we're bad people, well, you can still go to BitChute and Rumble.
And you know what? Feel free to pass these episodes on to your friends, family, whoever.
Absolutely.
Good information here.
We're giving these as open source.
Yeah.
So again, it's a pleasure coming into your home again.
Thank you
Rosalie.
for having us,
Yep.
and we'll see you next time. And I'm Rosalie Drysdale.
And I'm Ken Drysdale.
Take care.